Leadership is hard, and I've got some good news and I've got some bad news for you. The bad news is that I can't make it any easier, but the good news is that we can work on it together to get better. And you want to know the secret? Who you are comes before what you do. It's form before function. So let's get to work together. I'm Preston Poore, and this is PQ. Who is Preston Poore? Well, I'm first and foremost a husband to my bride, Carla. We've been married for 32 years. And then I've got two children, adult children. One is Caroline. She's 30, and she and her husband fully live in New York City, in Manhattan. And I moved up there a couple years ago and are enjoying that. And then my son, Benton, he is in logistics here in Atlanta, and he's engaged to a young lady here. And they get married next September, so looking forward to that. My career, I've done a lot of different stuff. Renaissance man in terms of things that I do. And I wouldn't say these are things that are my identity, but they're things I've done that I've had a good time with. I've spent time in consumer products. I've worked for the Coca-Cola company, the Hershey company, and also Ralston Purina. It's funny, I tell people that when I worked for Ralston Purina, anybody that had a dog or a cat loved me because I always had samples. And you can imagine when I worked for Hershey Foods, if you love chocolate or Reese's peanut butter cups, I had them. I had the samples, and people loved to come over to the house and get those. And then with Coke. Coke is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. People love Coke and all the products that we have for that. So spent a long time in consumer products. As a matter of fact, 22 years at the Coca-Cola company. That's a long time. I think that's well, we'll talk about that later on, but there was a lot of change and a lot of organizational changes that happened during that. At the Coke company, what I do, I was in a group called Franchise Leadership. And I was one of those folks that was the one that would help align the company's strategies with our bottling partners to make sure that we have a win-win on both sides. And so I was more like an ambassador, represented the Coca-Cola company to our bottling system. And as we go through this podcast over the next episodes, I'm sure you'll hear different anecdotes and stories about my career and folks that we talked to around that, but it's really about relationships and planning and strategic thought processes that went along that. I work for Hershey Foods, as I mentioned just a moment ago, and I was in sales. So not only did I sell chocolate, but I bet you didn't know this. Hershey used to be the world's largest pasta manufacturer in the United States. And so there were brands like Skinner, Ronzoni, San Giorgio. So I sold pasta and chocolate, peanut butter, all kinds of stuff. Used to go around grocery stores in Alabama and had fun with that. I used to work for the Dale Carnegie Training Company. And so I would go out to organizations and try to get them to take training classes and sign up for those, or I'd sign up individuals for training about how to become better public speakers or better in terms of human relations. I've also got a certification through the John Maxwell team, and it's a Maxwell leadership team. And that was really fun about getting certified to be a facilitator, trainer, keynote speaker, and coach. Another thing that I do and am involved in right now, there's a company that my family started about 20 plus years ago called Numerica Corporation. I sit on the board with my dad and my brother, and it's a small business, but it's a defense industry business in Colorado. It's got a lot of different things going on, but that's who I am right now. Yeah, so why the podcast and what led me to this moment? You know, I've always had this bent to help develop people, and it's just something, it's like, it makes my heart sing. It's like one thing, like, I don't know if you watch American Idol or seen that or not. I love the transformation of somebody that comes in, they have this raw talent, they have this skill, talent, ability, and they need coaches and people to come around them to shape them, mold them, and put them on a platform where they can succeed and help them succeed. And I saw that same transformation in a number of people in the business world. And when I left the Coca-Cola company, I really, really wanted to lean in and figure out, okay, how can I help people, this phrase, become the best version of themselves? How do they develop strong character that then translates into this dynamic leadership in the workplace where they can influence other people? How do you help people accelerate their learning? A couple problems I'm trying to help solve. I don't know if you know this or not, but there's a big leadership gap out right now. And why is that? Well, you've got a number of thousands, actually, of baby boomers every day that are retiring. They're leaving the workforce. And then you have the millennials that are, the baton is being passed to them. But the challenge is there's this lack of mentorship going on in the workplace. And what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, and what I've observed is that the folks that are leaving have a hard time connecting with the millennials, passing that baton because there's such churn with millennials. The statistics show, only staying in the role for 3 years. And so the question is, how do you mentor somebody, teach somebody how to become a leader? The other challenge is, I read this statistics, and it really resonated with me in my career and stuck with me, is that people, by the time when they take a management role, it's typically the average age is 30 years old, but they don't start leadership training until 40. So think about that. If you're getting placed into a people management role and not knowing the ins and outs, the soft skills, everything that goes around leading other people to accomplish extraordinary things, you're going to graduate from probably the school of hard knocks. And I've always said that wisdom is actually learning from other people. And so that's really the intent and the purpose behind this podcast, is to help close that leadership gap, and then also help people that get into those emerging leadership positions and help them differentiate themselves, get off the pile quicker, sooner, and get into a position of influence faster than the average, if you will. And I think there's no silver bullet for leadership. But I do remember one thing that's really helped shape and form my leadership while I was at the Coca-Cola company. It's this idea that how is greater than what. And what do I mean by that? I remember sitting in a conference room at the Coca-Cola company during one of my, 11 reorgs that I experienced over those 20 years. And I tell people all the time that working at the Coca-Cola company was like being a member of Congress. Every 2 years, you're up for re-election. And during that time frame, when you're reelected, you're campaigning as you go through that. And then the cycle starts all over again. But a couple of my roles that I was in, I was a people manager, and I would go into a room where they'd have a calibration session. And we would talk about the associates that would be able to stay with the organization and the ones that we were going to separate from. And the key differentiator I found in that was this, is that results are table stakes. You've got to deliver results, but those will keep you there short term. It's the how you deliver those results. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's the way you led people, the way you interacted, the way you collaborated, the way you engaged with other people. And so that really has shaped and formed my leadership philosophy. It's not what I delivered. It's not that being a top performer and leaving stuff in the wake behind me, really not caring about other people. It's more or less being a people servant, if you will, a servant leader in that how. And that how is the true differentiator. One of the things that I would mention to you is that a big thing in my career that made a big difference, that I learned a lot about early on, that I've seen tremendous results in an organization, is employee engagement. And to me, employee engagement is the level of discretionary effort that somebody's willing to put forth based on their relationship with their manager and or their work environment. And I was very blessed to be in opportunities at the Coca-Cola company a couple of times to lead engagement teams. And so leadership would sponsor me and a group of volunteers to come around the idea about how do we improve engagement within the workplace. And those were some of the best times that I had in my career, where I could see us making a difference about the way people related to each other, built trust over time, connected, collaborated, the innovation that happened. We got a lot of stuff done after we got over this lack of trust and this maybe what might be considered a toxic workplace. So those two things really shaped my career, and the thought process and the way I started looking at leadership and the way I started leading was the how is greater than what. How you do something is greater than what you do and deliver, and also this idea of employee engagement and the importance of how do we actually make a tremendous workplace environment and teach leadership to those that are people leaders. How does somebody, a millennial, if you will, get into a position of leadership and develop those leadership skills? And the biggest challenge they have on that right now, from my perspective, is patience. It's simply patience. Things don't happen overnight. Just because you get appointed to a role doesn't mean that you are necessarily a leader. And I guess really the challenge that we're trying to help people with is to differentiate themselves from other people in terms of how do you make decisions, how do you solve problems, how do you think, how do you collaborate with other people. Those things, instead of learning along the way, the question is how do you learn those earlier, sooner, and more often so you can get off that pile and so you can get into a situation where you're influencing other people. You're influencing situations, circumstances in the organization for a positive outcome. And so that's, I think, the challenge right now. People assume, I think, is that once they get that role, or things are going to happen overnight, quickly, all the success, the fame, everything's going to happen quickly. And it doesn't. It takes time. It really does. And so one of the things I would encourage folks to do is to consider what they are, doing their job really well where they are, surrounding themselves with mentors and learning from them, and then taking those things forward. And if you do those things and do them right, good things will come. If you try to accelerate, if you try to shortcut the process of becoming a leader, you're going to find that you're on some faulty ground. Yeah, it's funny. So in my journey from leadership, my leadership bent has been in me for a long, long time. I think a tipping point for me is at the Coca-Cola company. I was placed in a people manager role, and I had one person initially. And so that's where I think the company is putting faith in somebody and says, okay, we're going to give you, and you can show what you can do with that one individual. And so that was a good piece for me. But then, boom, I went from managing one person to 15. And that's quite a stretch. And if you complicate that, I'd say this was my strategic merchandising role at the Coca-Cola company. I had 15 plus people. We had 30 suppliers. We had all kinds of racks and point of sale. I can't even count the number of items that we were responsible for. Millions of dollars in spend. So very complex environment. And I found myself in those situations not knowing things like empowerment, not knowing about employee engagement necessarily, or exercising those things. And there was a tipping point for me where I had a 360 evaluation with the associates on my team. And it came back that I wasn't a very good leader. And I took a lot of those lessons to heart. We'll maybe talk about those during these episodes, but it took some self-reflecting on my part about why was I doing what I was doing? What do I want to achieve? How did I want to help people? And if I found that if I was trying to make myself look good in the organization and rise through the ranks, if you will, I found that in the wake of that, the people that I left behind, it didn't leave a good result. And so what I wanted to do, whether it was trying to stay at the company or not, it was less about that. It became more about how do I add value back to people? How do I help relationships thrive in the organization? How do I help people hit their goals, whether they're personal or professional and all that? And that tipping point, moving from one person in terms of managing one person into managing and then ultimately leading a whole series of 15 people in a very complex system across the United States, was a real growth opportunity for me. Now, the fun part on that is that they came back and did another 360 evaluation. And I stepped out of the room and I came back half a day later and sat down expecting to hear more negative feedback and things I needed to change. But that was eye-opening for me. I think the first comment said, hey, Preston, you've done everything that we've asked you to do. This time it's us. And so the team had a chance to reflect back on what they could do to lift our level of performance and come back. And that was a tipping point as well for me, that I leaned in with them. They saw that, and they took ownership of what they were doing. And that was really a great growth experience for me. How does my faith impact my work? Interestingly enough, I didn't show anybody my faith until about 2005. And that was a tipping point for me in my career where I was about to lose my job. I had a really tough conversation. I had a couple employees leave. I walk into my manager's office and had to tell her what was going on. And she just paused and looked at me and said, Preston, I don't know how you fix this, but you're just going to need to go figure it out. And I found over time that I was living really in these two different circles, if you will. One was a secular world and the other one was a sacred or spiritual world. And so my Sunday didn't really overlap my Monday and the rest of the week. I didn't understand how to connect the two, if you will. And so in the workplace, I was very focused on performance. How did I look? What was I accomplishing? And I always thought that I would rise through the ranks just simply on that one thing. Remember I mentioned the how is greater than what? I was more focused on the what to get us there. But that tipping point in 2005, when I went to an executive coach and they started calling out some of these issues, I figured out some triggers and I was leaning in and saying, okay, how do I actually live out my faith in the workplace? What does that look like? I didn't really have a good role model at the time. And so going through all of that stuff was the tipping point for me. And from that point, I'd tell you that things didn't happen immediately. It wasn't like a microwave, if you will. You turn on a switch and something happens. But it was a time of surrender. It was a time of taking the focus off of me and placing the focus on others. And man, I think that was the big thing that happened to me. It started figuring out, okay, instead of looking at my career plans, my development plans, what my performance was, it was looking at other people and saying, okay, how do I help you become, quote unquote, the best version of yourself? How do I help you develop into reaching your potential? How do I help you get promoted in the organization or go into the roles that you want to be in? And how do I support you? And over time, man, it's amazing the shift in the mindset that takes place, the change in all of that. And so that may be a long way around the answer to say, hey, how does my faith impact my work and shape that? It's because really, based on my faith, I've been able to take my eyes off of Preston and put it on other people. I think a lot of times you have to ask the why question. Why are you doing something? And for me, if I can make a difference in somebody's life, personally and professionally, there's intrinsic value for me. I get a jolt out of that, if you will. Again, I go back to this phrase, it makes my heart sing. I ask people all the time, what makes your heart sing? And what I mean by that is if you're walking in your passion, and you know it, and you get excited, and your feet hit the floor in the morning, you say, oh man, I want to get up and go to work in the morning, or I want to engage in this. That's a great place to be. And seeing somebody else grow is awesome. Share a quick anecdote here. Also with all the career stuff I do, I'm also an author. And one of the greatest moments I've had since I published my book, Disciple Leader, about 3 years ago, was I got connected with a local business leader here in the Atlanta market. And we went and had coffee and sat down, and he was in a really, really rough spot, I think personally and professionally. And we started talking, and he started pouring out his heart a little bit and the struggles that he was having at work, the challenges he was having, talking about depression and things like that. And then, boom, I started sharing some thoughts with him, drew some diagrams out for him and talked to him a little bit about it, asked him where he was in his life. Then what he did is he pulled out a copy of my book. And he goes, Preston, I read your book, the first chapter, and I was sitting on my bed, and I stopped midway through, and I just started crying because you described exactly where I was, and you got it. You understood it, and thank you for writing this. Now, I don't tell you that because of what's in the book, but it's the impact that a message can have on somebody else, and that's why I'm doing this, is try to help people on that, help them in terms of their faith, growing in their profession, growing professionally. It comes to mind is this anecdote I learned a long time ago at the Dale Carnegie Company when I was coaching, teaching, training, and selling at Dale Carnegie, selling classes. It's this story about a man that's walking along a beach, and he's got all these starfish that are on the beach, and he's picking one up at a time and throwing them back in the water. And he's doing that. And then somebody else comes along and observes and asks him, says, hey, what are you doing and why are you doing that? He says, well, I'm picking one up and throwing them in. And the person looks back and says, well, there's so many here. What kind of a difference are you going to make? It's not going to make a difference at all. He picked one up and threw it back in the water. Another one, he goes, well, it will to that one. And the idea behind that is that if I can just individually, what matters to me, it's not a big crowd, but if individually I can help somebody, like that individual did with the starfish, and put them back in the environment, help them grow and put them in a healthy area, I think that's a wonderful thing. Another anecdote that comes to mind for me is this. I remember telling this story in front of different groups, but it's a story about a son and a father that are in their living room, and the son keeps tugging on the dad, says, hey, Dad, you're home. I'd love to play with you. And the dad keeps ignoring him. And so the dad gives him a newspaper. He tears it up. And he gives it to his son. He says, okay, go. I want you to go and put this newspaper back together. And once you have it kind of a puzzle put back together, bring it back to me and show it to me. And so son goes away for a little while, and he comes back probably about an hour later. And he has it all neatly put together. And Dad looks at the paper, and it's classified ads and stuff like that on the paper. And he goes, man, this is amazing how you did this. How did you do this? And the son took the piece of paper, and he turned it around. And it was a picture of a boy. And he said, I saw this, and it said, I figured on the puzzle, if I put the boy together right, the rest will take care of itself. And what I mean by that is that if we focus on the character of the individual and help put them together right, the world, the rest of the stuff out there will take care of itself. And so you ask me, why am I doing this? It's simply because I want to help other people do better than I did, help them in terms of their career, help them become a positive influence in the world that greatly needs it today. This has been a fun journey to think through the podcast and the different guests. So here's the scoop on this. And my hope for you as a listener, what you're going to gain out of this. I did a first round of podcasts when I launched my first book, and that was fun. But now I've got an opportunity to get to different guests and different platforms to talk to them about some of these leadership issues that are out there. And so I have guests that are coming on. They're going to talk about starting their business. They're going to talk about how faith played a role in their professional lives. They're going to talk about courage. They're going to talk about employee engagement. These are all what I would call evergreen issues in the workplace right now, but maybe bring a little bit different perspective. I'm going to give you a quick preview of some of the guests we have coming in the lineup right now. First, we're going to have Mark Whitaker on board. Mark Whitaker is well known for his involvement in the largest price-fixing scandal in U.S. history. And he's got quite the journey. His life is captured in a movie called The Informant that starred Matt Damon. And Mark and I have gotten to be friends over the past couple of years, and excited to have him come on and talk about his journey, personally, professionally, and his journey of faith. We have Todd Hopkins coming on. Todd Hopkins is the founder and owner of Office Pride, a very large custodial office cleaning organization. And a wonderful man. He's an author. He's written 6 different books, and look forward to have Todd on here. Next, we'll have Kelvin Cochran. Kelvin was the former Atlanta fire chief back in 2014. He ran some challenges with the city of Atlanta based on some of the things that he had done and published, and it's a great story of courage. I met Kelvin at the Colson Conference when I was there back in May, and he's agreed to come on, so I'm excited about him. Elizabeth Dixon. I'm excited about Elizabeth. I had a chance to see Elizabeth speak. She's in my speaker bureau, I guess, in the portfolio, if you will. And Elizabeth is the president of the Trilith Foundation, which is south of Atlanta, where all the movies are made down there. And she's an exciting and dynamic individual. I want to have her come on and talk about purpose and meaning. Last but not least is Jeff Justice. Excited to have Jeff Justice on. Who's Jeff? Well, he's a stand-up comedian. I took a comedy workshop in Atlanta here a couple of years ago, and learned how to do stand-up comedy. And Jeff was my instructor, and he's a lot of fun, and looking forward to him coming in, talking about humor in the workplace and the intentionality behind writing comedy and things like that. So what can you expect through this? My hope is I'd like this to be a conversation between you and me. And I've got in the back of my mind that this is a conversation to help my 2 adult children, Caroline and Benton, because they're emerging leaders. And so if I was going to sit back and leave lessons and recordings for them, and you can just sit in on the conversation, I want you to hear some great examples of excellence, of courage in the workplace, of faith in the workplace, passion, energy, employee engagement, some of these different leadership topics that make a difference and will help you grow. So another thing you can expect from our podcast episode is going to ask everybody to do this. And here's why. First, it's called the hot seat. And one of the things I had at work that I felt like I was effective with was humor in the workplace and being playful, not taking myself so seriously. Remember that there's a tipping point that happened for me, and I realized that I was taking myself way too seriously. And so how do you lighten the mood a little bit, sometimes appropriately? And one thing I want to bring into the episode is for you to hear, hopefully, some fun answers from people, to get to know them, that connection point that you might not have otherwise. And so they're not going to see they're not going to see the questions before they come on to the episode. But we'll throw 10 quick questions to them. Have fun. May go off on a rabbit trail and ask them a little bit more about that, about an answer that they give us, but we'll have some fun with that. Hey, and if you like what you've heard on this podcast, please share it with others. Help them discover what we're doing in terms of talking about leadership and helping people differentiate themselves from others. You can contact me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to hear from you, your thoughts on this episode or future ones. Makes me think a little bit. I've been around the country a few times and around the world speaking, and it's interesting when people come up to me and say, hey, nice job. I always think that I'd appreciate that, but if they say and tell me what they learned, what their takeaway was, that's valuable. That's awesome, because that starts a conversation. And so when you reach out on LinkedIn and you want to comment, please let me know what you learned and took away, and I'd love to start a conversation with you. Our next episode is going to be with Mark Whitaker, and Mark is the subject of the largest price-fixing scandal in U.S. history, and he had a life transformation he's going to come on and tell us about next time. I'm Preston Poore. This is P Cubed, and I'll see you next time.